ratings steadily declining, the powers that be would demand that Season 4 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine shake up the status quo. But the questions for fandom were, what exactly did that mean? And would they be successful at it? Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at Star Trek Deep Space Nine's episode The Way of the Warrior, a suggestion by channel fan Tony Gilbert, who inspired me to write this episode to better understand that episode's place in Star Trek history. From the get-go, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was seen as the black sheep of the Star Trek family. Fandom had been thoroughly split between the I love the more realistic approach to Star Trek segment of the fandom and the no way, this is not what Gene Roddenberry would want as a Star Trek series. For better or for worse, Deep Space Nine was beginning to fail, its viewership ratings sliding into the abyss, its numbers dipping to levels that Star Trek Voyager could only dream of actually getting as their best. Nevertheless, at the time, Paramount was worried. The introduction of the USS Defiant had slightly boosted ratings, as now they could have actual starship battles and storylines, but it wasn't enough. Originally, the finale for Season 3 of Deep Space Nine was intended to be a cliffhanger episode that would see a Changelings on Earth storyline. But with Paramount worrying, they wanted a complete rethink of the series and did not want a cliffhanger, forcing the Deep Space Nine production staff to come up with Adversary as Season 3's finale. So the problem for showrunner Ira Steven Behr was how to shake up the show, adding new elements that could improve ratings, while at the same time not destroying what had come beforehand already in the series. The production staff for Deep Space Nine toyed with many ideas, but the one that really would stick with them was the idea of having Vulcan leave the Federation as the shakeup. Well, everyone was gung-ho for this idea, except for Behr himself, who kept thinking back to the line from the Season 3 episode The Die Is Cast, where a founder says something like, "After today, the only threat remaining to us from the Alpha Quadrant are the Klingons and the Federation, and I doubt either of them will be a threat for much longer." Behr discussed the line with Ronald D. Moore, who had written The Die Is Cast, saying, "Maybe we're making a mistake here. Maybe the Vulcans shouldn't be the ones that are leaving the Federation. Maybe it's the Klingons who should break off diplomatic relations. That might bring more heat to the series." Eventually, Behr liked this idea so much, he would pitch it to Rick Berman himself, and Berman would also love it. Berman then pitched the idea to Paramount's powers that be, who in turn also loved the idea, but it still wasn't enough of a shake-up for them. So Berman suggested somehow using this opportunity to bring to Deep Space Nine a beloved character from Star Trek The Next Generation. That character, of course, being Worf. And with that little nugget, the pieces for Season 4's opener began to fall into place. The biggest concern for everyone, though, was how to bring Worf into Deep Space Nine while simultaneously ensuring that character didn't overshadow already established characters of the show. It would have been far too easy to get this element wrong, and instead of Sisko's show, it could have suddenly become Worf's show. But the talents of Deep Space Nine's production staff was an amazing one, as Worf would end up seamlessly fitting into both the story and the cast. Events within the Star Trek universe would also line up to allow Worf's inclusion on the show not to seem forced. Star Trek Generations had shown the destruction of the Enterprise D, and the ship's destruction had basically meant that all the TNG cast in-universe were homeless. So what effect would the Enterprise's destruction have on someone like Worf? And thankfully, we the audience got to see. A little bit of Trek trivia for you all here is in regards to the great scene in the episode, the root beer scene between Quark and Garrick. In the original script, this scene did not exist at all, but when filming the episode, suddenly everyone was worried that the episode's runtime would end up far too short, and so this scene was written in. However, upon completion, it was discovered that the episode actually ran far too long, and so everyone wanted to cut the root beer scene right back out. That is, except Ronald D. Moore, who fought vehemently to keep the scene in, a fight which he won, thankfully, offering a very interesting commentary by aliens not a part of the Federation on how they viewed the galactic superpower. James L. Conway would direct this new direction adventure. Conway had directed 3 episodes of TNG along with 2 episodes of Deep Space Nine by that time, and would go on to direct 4 more episodes of Deep Space Nine, 4 episodes of Voyager, and 4 episodes of Enterprise. But for him, The Way of the Warrior was a very important job. You see, Conway was up for, and wanted badly, to direct the next TNG film, Star Trek First Contact. So he saw this episode as a sort of audition for that job. And Conway actually almost did get the directing job, being one of the last 2 directors in the running, the other, of course, being Jonathan Frakes, who, when push came to shove, Patrick Stewart, who made the final call, would choose Jonathan over James. Veteran Klingon actor Robert O'Reilly would make a triumphant return to Star Trek as Klingon High Chancellor Gowron. And as always, Robert would light up the screen as the Klingon leader. J.G. Hertzler would come on board as General Martok, another actor who tends to steal whatever scene he's in. I can't praise these 2 men's performances enough. In fact, in many episodes of Deep Space Nine for Martok and TNG and Deep Space Nine for Gowron, these 2 men elevate what would be considered an average story to greatness status. They are both truly amazing actors that tended to give the TNG 2D style Klingon Empire personalities the much needed subtlety and depth that this long established Star Trek species required. JG's Martok character would prove so popular with fandom that the Deep Space Nine writers would find a clever way to bring him back in the future, and have him as a semi-regular fixture on the station. Mark Alamo would also return to this episode, as always making his presence known and felt by the audience as Gul Dukat. And of course, Andrew Robinson would reprise his role as just plain and simple Garrick. You know, whether you like or dislike Star Trek Deep Space Nine, there is one thing that they did almost always to perfection, and that is character building. Most Star Trek shows didn't really take the time necessary to allow secondary characters to shine. Deep Space Nine, however, took the approach that every character is an important addition. And this, in my opinion, is the true strength of the show. For at no point do I ever find myself saying, geez, they're too focused on that non-important person. Rather, I find myself being thoroughly satisfied as suddenly Deep Space Nine feels closer to real life than most other Star Trek series, allowing us to breathe and to take in the true scope of the entire station and its surrounding space, realizing there is far more to the daily operations of life than Star Trek tended to show. The battle with the Klingon forces at the end of the episode was just spectacular, actually satisfying a need within fandom to see what the station is really capable of doing here in the 24th century. John Eves, a truly talented Star Trek starship designer, who would go on to work on the new Trek series, actually had designed a bunch of new Klingon starships for this episode. Unfortunately though, this episode was very budget intensive, and so his new Klingon starship designs would not be introduced. The production team opted to use already existing models in an effort to save money. And although spectacular and quite satisfying, it is unfortunate that these new ships weren't seen, as the Klingon Empire seems a little less fleshed out because of it. Another little bit of Trek trivia for you all here is in regards to the new Eves starship designs. Though not used in this episode, when Star Trek Enterprise came knocking at Eves' door for a 22nd century Klingon starship design, Eves would dig up the designs he had made for this episode, tweak them a bit, and one would become the 22nd century Bird of Prey. And an additional bit of interesting Trek trivia for you all here is in regards to the space battle scenes themselves. The effects department actually used Playmate toys, off-the-shelf model kits, and even the Hallmark Bird of Prey Christmas ornaments in the background shots. When one of the toy ships was required to explode, special effects manager Gary Monarch filled it with explosives, party glitter, and let the ornaments burn. Since The Way of the Warrior was effectively a complete direction change for the series as a whole, many other changes apart from the Klingon Empire and Worf would also take place. The main theme of the show would get an update, the music becoming a little more upbeat and militaristic, while the visuals would depict a now bustling space station thanks to the discovery of the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant. Characters aboard the station would also receive promotions in between seasons 3 and 4. Lieutenant Jadzia Dax is promoted to Lieutenant Commander, while Dr. Julian Bashir is promoted from a junior grade lieutenant to a full lieutenant. Not only would the production team take advantage of the shake-up orders to redefine the Federation's relationship with the Klingon Empire, but they'd also make a change to the Cardassian Union as well. With the destruction of the Cardassians' Obsidian Order, suddenly this would allow for Cardassia to overthrow the military as well, taking advantage of the situation to install a civilian government. And although short-lived, it would certainly add a new dynamic to the show. Originally, this episode would premiere as a 2-hour single episode, but for future ones, it would appear as a 2-parter. As a result of this, the episode needed to be cut down for time, and so many scenes were cut from the 2-part version. These scenes included Dax and Kira in the holographic spa, Bashir and O'Brien discussing how quiet the Klingons were being with Quark, and the cute little scene between Odo and Quark, where Quark tells Odo he intends to defend his bar. Overall, The Way of the Warrior is a clear example of how Star Trek can adapt and grow, while at the same time stepping outside its box from the expectations of fandom. Ira Steven Behr and his team would take great care with Deep Space Nine to ensure that it was a different sort of Trek to the Stars, tackling various issues not only through human eyes, but through the eyes of everyone around them. In recent years, Deep Space Nine's original label of Black Sheep would become its strength. It's much closer in scale and scope to the storytelling ways of today, and perhaps that's why it continues to grow in popularity, as new fandom expects a more subtle, make-you-think approach to storytelling than the beating you over the head with its message style of the other Berman-era Trek series. The Way of the Warrior would begin an exciting chapter of adventures for the series, and prove once and for all that Star Trek could take place on a space station as much as it could on a starship, and perhaps more importantly, that there was still a lot about the human adventure that still needed, and could be, explored.
Listen, battle stations. To the sound of terror. To the cry of battle.
The peace treaty between the Federation and the Klingon Empire is ended.
Witness a merciless enemy. One final hope.
Lieutenant Commander Ward. No! Reporting for duty, sir.
The showdown has just begun on the next Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What did you think of The Way of the Warrior? Did you start off by disliking Deep Space Nine only to love it years later? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel protect itself from the Klingon Empire? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Glory to you and your house.